all for coming today, and I'd like to extend my thanks to Erdenbot and to Peter and Ertnos and everybody who put this festival together. I'm very excited to be here digitally. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. My name is Kip Hutchins. I'm a cultural anthropologist. I'm currently teaching at Oberlin College, and I've been doing research in Mongolia since 2010. Been working with horsehead fiddle players and cultural heritage administrators this whole time. And what I'm really interested in is how people use music to connect with things that are not human, that you wouldn't normally consider to be music consumers, right? More or less, I'm interested in animals. To a lesser degree, I'm interested in the way people use music to connect with landscapes and with the spirits of deceased people and things like that. And I've found really that cultural heritage is a useful vehicle for exploring some of these ideas. There is a tendency to think about cultural heritage as a way of remembering the past, as a way of understanding the way things used to be and carrying that knowledge into the future. But I would also add that in my research, I've really found that cultural heritage is also a way of imagining different kinds of futures. This is, for many of the musicians that I've worked with over the past 11 or so years, this cultural heritage framing gives space for people to really examine the world that they live in, examine the modernist institutions that they're working out of, whether they're conservatories or orchestras, things like that, and imagine and build towards futures that, drawing on our understandings of the past, drawing on these kind of ideas about folk heritage, give a way of understanding a future where maybe human and animal and landscape are a little bit more entangled once again, and maybe living in a sort of harmonious way. In most of the interviews that I conducted in my most recent trip to Mongolia from 2016 to 2018, this one common idea kept coming up again and again. Anytime I asked about why do people play the murungur for camels during the camel coaxing ritual, or if I asked how do animals like horses respond to the fiddle, this common explanation came up multiple times, that the fiddle's cords and bowstrings are made with the hair of a living horse, never a deceased one, and that the body is made with wood and the rosin is made of sap taken from a tree. Then a person plays it, animating the instrument with their own emotional force. Together, these elements give a kind of living energy to the object, and the cooperation of these living elements is often referred to as the сүnс, сүnс of an instrument. Now, that's a tricky word to define in English. You could say maybe ghost or spirit, soul. I'm going to look at 3 answers that I received on follow-up questions of what does the сүnс mean. Although there are many, many answers, and of course, many fiddlers don't like to think this way and don't engage with the instrument on a spiritual level. But I'm going to think about these 3 answers. One, the сүnс as a soul. Sorry, my paper is rustling. One is the сүns as a soul that connects humans with non-human animals. One way as the сүns, thinking of it as a kind of spirit connected to lay Buddhist practice. And another way of thinking of the сүns as a metaphor for artistic skill. These are, of course, not the only ways that fiddlers have explained this term, and I'm only taking these three because they came up so many times in different explanations of the folklore and philosophy and spiritual thinking around this instrument. I'm going to focus on the perspectives of three horse and fiddle experts based out of music institutions in Ulaanbaatar. I'm going to refer to them by pseudonyms based on the ethical agreement under which I carried out this research. So I'll be calling them Bolto, Touche, and Tuya, respectively. Bolto is a Murunghur performer and teacher in his late 40s, originally from rural Mongolia, grew up in kind of pastoralist encampment. Touche is a little bit older and teaches Murunghur at an art school in Ulaanbaatar, specializing in long song and classical music. And Tuya is a music theory teacher and musicologist who also, like Bolto, was raised in rural Mongolia and came to the city originally to pursue Murunghur performance, but was turned away because the teacher at the time refused to take female students. And so she redirected her energy into studying the philosophy of the instrument and of other traditional instruments like it. Many of the musicians that I worked with were uncomfortable with expressing overtly spiritual opinions directly. Bolto elaborates in depth on his personal cosmology, but doesn't name his beliefs with a specific spiritual tradition. Touche is happy to describe his practice of Buddhism, but practices alone. And Tuya directly challenged any non-secular framing of the fiddle as being сүнс or with the spirit, offering rather to think of the instrument as сүнслик awiate, having a kind of spiritual sound. I'm sensitive and attentive to the need to not come off as overly superstitious when talking about your personal spiritual beliefs. That's something that I think a lot of people really struggle with working out of these modernist institutions. But the framing of cultural heritage gives people a way of exploring different ways of thinking about themselves, about the universe, and about the instrument itself, while safely enveloped within the modernist institution. It's easy to avoid any kind of derision or take the risk of ever being seen as anti-modern, because heritage creates this nice couching of modernity to any of these discussions. So pretty much the way I got into thinking about the сүнс of the fiddle is that in one of my very earliest interviews, and again, Bolto, this fiddle teacher that I mentioned, grew up in a pastoral setting and had a lot of experience with pastoralist rituals that involved the fiddle, like playing the fiddle for camels to calm them down and reunite the mother with the child camel. When I asked him about things like that, he immediately started off with a good fiddler should be able to calm a horse as easily as they can calm a person. That this is, for him at least, a testament of being a good performer, that it's not just people that should be able to take it well, it's that horses should be able to hear it as well. And then moved on to explain that for camels, if you have access to a fiddle but no fiddler, you can put the fiddle on the animal's humps and face it toward the wind. The air moving along the strings will cause the fiddle to resound, which in turn will calm the camel. This is a way of performing a camel coaxing ritual when you have no expert fiddle players on hand. Camels are tall enough that their humps do catch strong and consistent wind coming off of the step. And in a way, you could say that the wind does play the fiddle. It does cause the strings to create a sound. Bolto added, quote, "People say that the сүnс of the fiddle is like a wind that guides the hand of the fiddler, just like how I guide the hand of my students when they're first learning to play the instrument." It's important to be clear on what he means by сүnс here. He takes a folk religion kind of perspective and describes it as a kind of soul, not in the sense of a Christian soul, but as something that gives you life that you could have potentially multiple of. In his explanation of the instrument, the fiddler has a soul, has their own soul, or maybe souls. The horse also has its own soul. And the connection that the horsehair creates binds the fiddler and the horse together, at least temporarily, creating a kind of a third spirit, a third сүнс that the horse and the fiddler can share. This brings the worlds of horse and human together, and an expert fiddler should be able to use that to create something that is not just for human consumption. He makes this explicit claim that not only does the fiddle have its own сүnс, and that the horse has its own сүnс, but that there is temporarily a сүnс in the middle that is created by the fiddler and the horse playing together. He describes this using what I would refer to as Tangrius metaphors, likening the performance of a fiddle to the meeting of winds coming from the east and from the west. When the two winds meet, they create a third that travels its own direction without losing any part of their original trajectories. As he put it, quote, "There is a thick string and a thin string on the fiddle, but when you play them together, you get a third sound. This sound is at once both of the others and unique to itself." The soul of the human and of the horse and the third soul of the fiddle are at once the sum of their parts and something greater than. By playing, the fiddler develops the insight to see beyond these divisions between horse and human, at least temporarily, and find some kind of common ground. He finished his explanation with an appeal to restorative nostalgia, saying, quote, "We once knew about all of this, and then we forgot. Now we are just remembering it again." Bolto's explanation on the role of the Moranjor for connecting humans with animals is really focused on people and two kinds of non-human animals, horses and camels. And there are really concrete examples of using the horse in a kind of pastoral context that he's drawing on to elaborate this point. There are more ritualized uses of the fiddle that are a little bit maybe more rare or less openly talked about. And that's really where Tupše comes in. Tupše, as well as a few of the other performers that I interviewed, uses Moranjor music as a kind of lay Buddhist practice, performing the instrument for sacred mountains, and considers it an offering to the bodhisattvas that may be housed in their stupas. Tupše offered that the wood used in the construction of the fiddle's body and the tree sap used as rosin are also key to the fiddler's ability to produce music that resonates with humans, horses, and the land alike. While Bolto's reading was maybe more animistic or in line with folk religion, Tupše really attributed the fiddle's potential to reach not only non-human animals, but other non-humans like mountains and other kinds of landscapes to the unifying power of Buddha. His explanation takes the form of a religious folktale, which with more time, I would be happy to relate the tale in its entirety, but to give a brief version of it, in his understanding, in his mythology, Buddha created the horse and fiddle using the hairs from one of his own horses in the heavenly realm, but the sound was not good. So Erlikon, a deity of the underworld shared between Tibetan Buddhism and Inter-Asian folk religion, contributed the sap used as rosin from the earthly realm, and when the human performer played it, it then had the correct sound, beautiful sound. Now, the point of the story, as Tupše told it, is that the horse and fiddle itself can be seen as a kind of religious artifact, that it has elements from the three realms of existence, the heavenly horsehair, the earthly rosin, and the human performer in the middle. And as such, you can, through performing it, you can kind of meditate on the fact that you need life as well as death. You need joy along with sorrow in order to have beauty in the world. That is why the instrument connects humans with other beings in creation. The сүнс in this sense is a natural spirit, a creation of Buddha working in tandem with Erlikon. And though Tupše does practice his religion in private in a personal ritual, I found in later interviews, a lot of other fiddlers said kind of similar things. Another fiddler, called Batr, mentioned that he also plays Murunghor as a kind of lay Buddhist rite, but pointed out that the spiritual practices associated with the Murunghor tend to be hybrid by nature. He described the instrument as alive in a sense that, not that it was like a person alive, but that it had liveliness, and argued that the ability to make the sounds that non-human animals and landscapes make give the instrument a kind of mimetic spiritual power. He said, quote, "When I play for a sacred mountain, I choose a song that channels water, wind, and wild animals. I sound the environment of the mountain, and thus my song becomes a ritual of praise for it." And he explained that the сүнс is central to the hybridity between lay Buddhist practice, shamanism, other folk religious practice in Mongolia. The fiddle has power as not only a religious tool, but also as a secular herding tool, because the сүnс gives human performers access to a more than human frame of knowledge. As he put it, the music of the fiddle, quote, "does not bring the sky to us, but it brings us to the sky." This spirit is not inherently Buddhist, nor nomadic, nor shamanic. It's perhaps Mongolian, but most importantly, it's a horse, and a horse does not belong to its destination. It simply ferries its rider to it. Now, having heard this term sunste hukjum to define the horse, the fiddle, or instrument with a сүnс, in several interviews, I decided to ask Toya, the musicologist that I mentioned earlier, how she would describe the term, and she did not like the term at all. She did not like the term сүnс or sunste hukjum. She offered instead сүnslik aliyah, or a spiritual kind of sound. She argued that the сүns is a metaphor. It simply means that it can touch the hearts of Mongolian people and has the ability to pull talent out of performer. In her description, the сүns, refers to artistic skill. I kind of skipped a slide there, but so throughout the interview, Toya is rejecting this non-secular framing. She's keeping it very secular and arguing that the сүns is the artistic skill, the instincts of the performer. But there is something a little bit extra on top of it. She also acknowledges that the living elements of the instrument give it its kind of unique characteristic. And she said, quote, "From a young age, I always knew the instrument had a сүns, had flesh and blood and its own teeth. I just didn't know how to put it into words. Now I can say the word for it is indrik." That is the character of the fiddle and its quality. The indrik is the wind and breath of the fiddle. So though she distanced herself from overly Buddhist or shamanic readings of this force, she did refer to this fiddle's power using a non-secular term, indrik. Though derived from Russian energy and a cognate with the English word energy, in this usage, indrik has a kind of spiritual meaning, and one that popped up a couple of times in my research, but that's covered more expertly elsewhere. Dr. Madison Piscata describes indrik as a form of energy that is a distinctly Mongolian style of New Age reinterpretation of what would be in the past known as what Humphrey calls energies in nature, right? Of things like sahops, for example, of nature spirits. As Madison Piscata argues, indrik demonstrates that New Age thought, which is neither fully religious nor totally secular, flourishes in post-socialist contexts where there are histories of religious repression, like Mongolia, but also in the Eastern Bloc, for example. For Toya, the сүnс of the horsehead fiddle is this New Age indrik. It has a physical manifestation as the vibrations that the fiddle produces. These vibrations align with the hearts of their audiences, human and non-human alike. And further, she argued that indrik guides the hand of the fiddler, mirroring both those claims from earlier. As in the previous examples, Toya's answer involves hybridity with folk religion and Buddhism. And in each case, spiritual thinking and folkloric thinking are, of course, joined by musicological thinking, of philosophical thought, and also of secular traditional Mongolian music theory as well. In each of these explanations, the сүнс is a byproduct of the Modenhor's mediation between human and non-human actors within a network of Mongolian musical heritage performance. However, each of these three individuals identifies a different network. Bolto's version has the fiddle mediating between a horse and a human, specifically. Tufche's explanation has the Modenhor mediating a much larger network that includes all the entities that contributed materially in some way to the fiddle's construction and performance, including the human musician, the horse who provides the hair, the trees that provide the wood and the rosin. Tuya, however, describes the fiddle's body as mediating directly between the musician and the fiddle itself, as the fiddle's body is what produces the сүнслік әуе and generates kind of positive energy and positive feedback for the fiddler and for the audience. The multiplicity of explanations and interpretations of this сүнс characteristic really gestures to an important facet of post-socialist Mongolian life, a major pluralistic spiritual awakening. When I first started working with musicians in the region 11 years ago, a lot of people were very tentative about speaking publicly on spiritual or folkloric kinds of ideas. Many of the fiddlers that I work with have told me that since I first met them, they've either come to realize that spirits have more power than they originally thought, or just become more comfortable with me as a researcher and have started to open up the ways that they're willing to explain and to consider the instrument. In this way, reflections on non-humans' ability to consume Modenhor music opens up discourses on post-socialist personhood and spirituality and the kind of potentials that we have for thinking through cultural heritage in the 21st century and beyond. And I argue that cultural heritage here opens up a discursive space for people to really be able to critically examine their world with their relationships with animals and with the land, with nature, without having to leave the confines of modernity. It allows for speculation and for reflection on folklore that leaves the kind of judgment and derision to the side, at least temporarily. And I've got a lot more to say on this, so if you have questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the festival myself.